Do you trust your intuition? Our next guest encourages leaders to develop and use intuition. CEO Dean Newlund, founder of Mission Facilitators, works with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofit organizations, and educational institutions. His work has taken him across the U.S. and to 19 countries around the world. He is the host of the popular podcast, The Business of Intuition. You are watching Profonde TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Dean, it's a pleasure talking with you. You have a challenging mission. You call yourself Mission Facilitators. What are you doing? What is your work?
Our work is to work with individuals, teams, organizations to help them identify and ultimately live what their purpose is. In a nutshell, it's all about alignment to something that's greater than our own individual efforts. It's about connecting to purpose.
What's between people and connecting to their purpose? What gets in the way?
This thing called the brain, this prefrontal cortex, these distractions that we allow ourselves to get off course with, billions of bits of information that are screaming for our attention every second or every minute. The distractions of being human is really what gets in the way. And I think we have to be in the world. We have to live our lives. We have to pay our mortgages and feed our kids and make sure our dogs have water in their dishes. All that's important. But at the same time, there's a greater part of all of us, which is, I believe, that soul's calling, that heart's voice that says, what am I here to do? What is this all about? How can I contribute? What am I doing besides just the day-to-day activities? And so the purpose that I feel that my life is all about is connecting to purpose and helping others do that, whether that be an individual, whether that be a team, whether it be an organization. And when we have that kind of alignment, we actually do change society. We do change the way people live and work. Most of us spend most of our time in some form of work. Why not use that particular time in our life as a period for transformation, not just making a buck? Why not take all of that juicy stuff that we do when we're on vacation? We always say, oh, I got to make sure that I do this back in my real life and make that part of our real life. That's what I'm interested in.
You have been doing a great deal of work on something you call intuition. How does that play into your work?
Intuition is a fascinating subject, in my opinion, because we talk to people about when they've made some really important decisions that had a life-changing activity. Often you hear them talk about, I didn't have data, I didn't have some specifics that I could refer to. I had a gut feeling. I had a voice that told me this was what I should be doing. And why is intuition so important in organizations? Because I've noticed so many times when people have come into board meetings and they have a sense about something, but because they are not the subject matter expert, they can't speak up, and they're not even given the opportunity to speak up. I've seen guiding principles in organizations that say that we make decisions based on data, and I think that's limiting. I don't discount that data is important. I think it is really important, but it's only a part of a much greater access of information that we don't always afford ourselves to. So when you allow and when you encourage and when you reward people for tapping into this sixth sense, if you will, you also open up the door for their engagement, for their energy, for their creativity, for their innovation, for their passion, for their love of one another, because it's not being narrowly focused on just what is known, what is factual, and what is data-based. So intuition really is just a tool for, I believe, greater engagement in life, in work, in our relationships, and in accessing much more information, much more knowledge than what we sometimes give ourselves the opportunity to connect to.
It must be very difficult when the data is in contradiction with the gut feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Have you run into this circumstance where the data says one thing and the gut says the other?
Yeah, and I think the greatest example, I can give you a bunch of personal examples in my life, but it's certainly, I'll give you a personal example and I'll give you a business example. So I'll start with a business example. So many times when you hear people talk about hiring a new employee and you sit down and you rattle off their CV and you call up the people who have some sort of background about that person for reference, and everything looks good on paper. Everything is clear and clean, and they've got the education, the background, and you hire them. And yet sometimes those people come into the organization and they are a complete mismatch for the culture. And I've asked these people in the hindsight and say, if you were to go back, what did your gut say about that person that you hired into your team? Was it something you felt in a sort of a visceral way that they were right for your team and your culture? And often they will tell me, no, that's not the case. It looked good on paper when in all actuality, my gut said something else. I've heard people who are psychiatrists and marriage counselors say that they think about and they refer back to all the people they've worked with who got a divorce, for example. Every one of them said, yeah, I kind of knew this was not going to work. I had a gut sense about it, but the data of this person, this relationship, really good. When I was younger, I actually was just finishing up a difficult divorce. And I was at that point in my life where I was thinking about, what do I want to do now? And there was every data point that you could imagine that says, Dean, you should stay in Minneapolis. You've got family, you've got friends, you have business contacts. Why don't you just stay here? In fact, I had a lot of people recommending that I do that. And it didn't feel right. It just felt wrong. It felt like, no, I need to go back to where I went to school, which was Seattle, Washington. And I needed to do it soon. I needed to do it by, I think it was July 11th. So I did. I got in my car and I remember my father pulling me aside. He says, I don't know what's going on with you, but you're not making any sense. And I said, Dad, I know. This makes no sense to me either. But I just have this gut feeling that the data, so to speak, that you are providing me just doesn't line up. So I did. I got in my car, drove up to Seattle. 2 days later, I met this delightful woman, fell in love with her. We're now best friends and soulmates. And the business started when that decision was made. That's how the relationship started. That's how my business started, all at that particular time. So how? I don't know, Phyllis. I don't know why that was so important. I cannot explain it within my noggin why it felt so right to do it. But it was the right thing to do, and it was against data.
I think there's also another element, though, and I want to go further with you. What you described just then seemed to have some risk-taking involved,
yes,
or an openness to taking risk. Does that play a part in the decision-making that's important?
I think it does. And the risk for me, and I think with other people, is trusting something that doesn't have a language. Trusting something that feels outside the norm of how people are supposed to make important life decisions. We're supposed to be rational. We're supposed to do our research. And all of those things, again, are really important. And I don't discount that. I actually feel that data and intuition is a marriage, that they've come together. And the combination of those two creates wisdom. But one without the other is a little bit wobbly. I think you need both. I think it's important. But definitely that the risk involved is trusting something that, for those who don't always have an experience trusting their intuition, feels like you're jumping off a cliff without a net. It feels unknown. And I think the more people begin to listen to that voice and trust that intuition, and they begin to see that the results that they created as a result of that decision was positive, then the risk becomes less and it doesn't feel so scary. For me, I make a lot of decisions, not only based on intuition, sometimes on data, but I now have used it so much. In fact, I run it through my intuition. Data sounds good, but let's check the intuition swim lane, if you will. And if it feels right as well as being backed up by some data, yeah, let's do it. No problem. I sometimes don't need data to make that decision, but I've got it down to the point where I don't have the same risk level following my intuition as I did before.
Okay, well, you know me from having talked with me in your interviews. I'm going to push back a little bit.
Please.
I did a television show years ago called Straight Talk out of New York. And my least favorite topic to talk about ever was food. And one day we had some exquisite gourmet experts on the show, and I was always at a deficit in this area. And I somehow made a casual remark to this food expert that I didn't like some particular food, some fancy food. I don't know whether it was foie gras or something unusual. And he looked at me and he said, it's not that you know what you like what you know.
Mm.
It's not that you know what you like, it's that you like what you know. So what he was communicating to me was it's important to have a lot of tasting experiences to build your knowledge of what you like. So you say that you go with your gut and what it feels like, but do you have to have a reservoir of experiences to build that knowledge? Or are you limiting yourself by only going with what you seem to be familiar with in certain circumstances?
Good point. It's a good point. I don't think so, though. I have recently I had a situation where there was a friend of ours who I could tell in hindsight was upset by some interactions that took place. I don't know that. I don't even like that idea that this person is upset with me or something that I may have caused. I don't like that idea at all. In fact, I would rather avoid it if I would be really honest. But there was something about some sort of pattern recognition, something in the way they were speaking, something in very subtle nonverbal communication that I knew something was off. It just sort of, like when you walk into a room, into, maybe it's a party, maybe it's Christmas, maybe it's some event, and you can just sort of feel the vibe in the room. Well, you might know certain things about these people. You might like to have a certain sort of experience, but your intuition might guide you into something that you don't like. It might be a warning sign, might tell you, don't go this direction. Turn left, because if you don't, you're going to hit a deer. The intuition can be a guide for things that you need to hear, you need to understand, you need to experience in some ways, but it may not be what you like. And I don't necessarily think that we are only intuitively picking up on things that we know and that we like, that the intuition is ultimately like a receiver of information that goes beyond our normal viewfinder of what's out there. And some of it is tying into things we like and we understand and we have experience around, and sometimes it's not.
Well, that's reassuring, because you're really talking about intuition as this additional skill. It's like an additional tool in your toolkit. So I'm learning from you as we speak. So you said you were going to give some organizational examples. You gave a personal example about your use of intuition. How does it work in an organization? You mentioned the hiring sequence. Now, my experience as a consultant sometimes in corporations is that people tend to hire people who look like them and sound like them and walk like them. So how does it really work if you're using your intuition and leading people and choosing people from your own experience?
Well, it goes back to, if I were to go into backing up a little bit from what you were asking about,
Sure.
How do you know you have an intuitive insight and how do you not? that's sort of like, where do we start? Where does this all begin, right? I don't know about you, but I can tell when I'm using my brain because I can literally feel the energy up in here. And if it goes so intense, I can almost get like a headache of just the energies just feels lodged in this part of my head. And so I know I'm using my intellect, I'm using my brain, I'm using my prefrontal cortex, and that's fine. But then when you talk about intuition and bringing that into work, I can ask people around, let's say it's a strategy. Maybe it's something we're doing with building our team. Maybe there's some conflict that's needing to be resolved in some ways. And we can identify it intellectually. That's fine. But I think the intuition shows up for people in different ways. But for me, it shows up in the body. I feel it. There's something about, why do we say, what does your gut say? There's a reason for that. We say, what does your gut say? Because there is information that's coming from our gut that we don't necessarily always get from our head. The body has different receptors. It's a big, huge a place to receive information. Are we paying attention to how it feels, how we breathe? Some people say they get goosebumps on the back of their neck or their arm. What is it that shows up for people? So I think if you find out what is your signature way to understand when you are intuitive, then you sort of know when you are and when you're not, right? So why is that important? Going back into business, you're sitting down, you're talking to people, maybe it's about developing a plan, we're trying to determine a new product, you choose the subject. Come at it with your data, come at it with your spreadsheets, pull out your pro formas, your Excel spreadsheets, all of that's fine. But in the end, what does our collective gut say? Is there truth in the room that we all feel that's the right decision? Do we know that? Does the team, does the leader, does the individual feel right about it? We have this line in our company's guiding principles that we will not step over anything. What does that mean? That means that if we have an intuitive feeling about something, we're going to call time out and say, wait a second, that doesn't quite feel right. I don't know why, but it doesn't feel right. So you can bring that into organizations in companies and have a better decision made. Because I'll tell you, Phyllis, so many times these organizations and these companies will make decisions that look right on paper, but the team, if they were honest, would go back and say, no, we just didn't feel right about it, but we didn't have the voice, we didn't have the confidence to say something counter.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Are women better at this than men?
Oh, but I'm not a woman. I can't speak to that. No, but I won't dodge the question. Yes, because I believe that women, one could say through training, maybe through some sort of biology that I'm not an expert in, are more in tune with feelings, and feelings is more in the body, less in the head. So yeah, I think that women, in my experience, are by and large better at this because of practice. For men, I don't think that they have any less capability to be intuitive. We just haven't practiced it as much. We've been very encouraged to be doers and to be thinkers and to be rewarded for problem solving, this sort of stuff in the head. That's what guys have been patted on the back to do, right? And so we develop these muscles over time. But I don't believe that men can't be intuitive. I just mean that they haven't had quite as much experience or practice is what I should say.
As I listen to you, I think back to how many times my gut feeling and my intuition have been a problem for me. For example, in school, getting quadratic equations right, unless you did it by the linear fashion of identifying how you got the answer, even if right, was marked wrong. Intuition is not rewarded in our education system. Am I on the right track here?
You hit it. Where do people learn intuition? Hi, I want to get a PhD in intuition. I'm going to take a class in my 7th grade that's, science and history and reading and writing and intuition. It's not part of our curriculum. And it's not something that we encourage in our kids. And I'm trying with my son at the age of 20, and it's sort of taking root, is to keep bringing conversations into our relationship with him around, well, what does your gut say, Taylor? Forget everything else at this point, but let's also look at it. What do you feel in your gut, or what do you sense is the right thing? And follow that, see where it takes you. So I don't think we encourage it. I think we've become it's almost like our decision-making process has taken the form of technology, that it's all about ones and zeros. It's all about accuracy and data. And so we become sort of anthropomorphized versions of data. We have sort of taken on that sort of intellectual, precise appreciation for what my computer can do and what your computer to do. And now we expect people to be the same way. And when you do that, you don't open people up for their intuition. You narrow them down even further. And so in answer to your question, I absolutely agree.
That's a brilliant thing. I mean, you say many brilliant things, but that was an interesting, I want people to hear that again. An anthropomorphized form of data. So we take data and we make human beings into our expectations of them are that they are going to operate and interact with us in the same way that data does.
Yeah.
I think you're really on to something there. I can see that now that you've said that. You know how someone tells you a new word and you suddenly see it all over the place? It's the same thing. You've just done that. I see that we do that. We want our answers to be like the data. I'm guilty of that. I like to speak in bullet points. I like people who talk to me in bullet points. And yet the context is far richer, the deeper context of a conversation. That's a powerful thing. You got to write about that. I mean, I think that's an interesting point.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it was something that I've been aware of for a while, and it kind of became the early stages of a TED Talk I did about a year ago on intuition in business. And I remember writing about it and thinking about it. And that was one of those concepts that sort of kept coming back to me. We sort of become the machines that we push against. We have the same expectations of each other as we do our cell phones. We want people to be fast. We have such a short attention span. Watch a movie that was created back in the 60s and 70s, and you will be bored to death because it's so slow. We have, this, you're in media, those changes between one scene and another happen at seconds, and so we have such a heightened expectation that things happen quickly because technology has taught us to do so. And so that then becomes, well, I expect a quick response. One of the things that organizations get really frustrated with their team members is that, I was just talking to somebody about this yesterday, he goes, what's the issue with this person? Well, they don't respond to email fast enough. Well, what's fast enough? Well, I want it by the end of the day. I mean, well, wait a minute, they've already got 400 emails. What do you expect? So we have such expectation for people to be quick and be data-like and to become almost like cyborgs that where's the humanity, and what is humanity in a world that technology is becoming so pervasive? And they say, I heard this is sort of scary. I heard this say that this could be the last generation of what it feels like to be human being. Oh. That we might be at a point where in the next generation or two, that the singularity of technology and humans and humanity is becoming sort of so blurred. I mean, Elon Musk is talking about this. He's really concerned about this. He's now saying we need to have policies and procedures and rules and laws that basically protect the human species from being overtaken by technology. And they're doing it more in Europe, but we haven't done it here. And Zuckerberg is sort of saying, no, technology is fine. We should keep moving forward with it. And Elon is saying, well, let's be a little bit more thoughtful about this. All this is coming back to this idea that intuition is one of those things that makes us human. And I feel it's very, very important that we hold on to that. We can make better decisions. We can be better people, better listeners. Because that was one of the things I got from you, Phyllis, when we talked, was your ability to listen is so advanced, and you create such a space for people. That to me is one of those placeholders for intuition, is that listening that you do so well. So anyway, I rambled off a bit, but.
No, you did not ramble. I'm not sure that I want to leave this topic of humanity, but I just want to make sure, because what you're saying is that intuition may be the thing that we can look to help retain our humanity. That
Yeah.
by developing that muscle, it may be powerful in our own human survival, that we shouldn't be killing it off in our kids, and we ought to be practicing it. I think this is an interesting tool. I mean, of course you could run to Las Vegas with intuition too and lose all your money. I don't think that's
Right.
but I see it as a tool. Now, you've been interviewing lots and lots of people. You use talking to colleagues and other coaches and other executive leaders as a part of your work. Why do you do this, and what are you discovering in this?
Good question. Why I'm doing this is because I really want to get intuition out of the closet and into the boardroom. That's maybe a nice little phrase, but I really think that's important. I think that organizations and everybody that lives in companies can benefit by this discussion. I mean, intuition has gotten a bad rap. It is seen as flaky. It is seen as non-scientific. It is seen as too woo-woo. And in fact, I was interviewed by somebody and said, isn't intuition just woo-woo? So I want to try to demystify this thing. Let's don't make this into something that makes you less than. In fact, maybe this is something that makes you more than, So I really want to create the space for that and to invite people into it. And I am a student of this. I just happen to think this is fascinating. Do I always find myself being good at intuition or accessing it when I really, in hindsight, should? Heck no. I am still learning about all this, but I think it's an important tool. What am I learning? I've had some absolutely, I don't have enough time to tell you all this stuff I'm learning, but intuition has really come into our conversations with this podcast that you and I were talking about when you were on it, called The Business of Intuition. And we've had national writers, I've had karate masters, I've had doctors and coaches like yourself. There's been veterinarians, artists, and their process and how they get into the zone to be able to create their work. It's really been fascinating, but I think that everything that I keep hearing and learning is that, one, there's a scale of people's understanding and appreciation and courage to use intuition. So it really depends. Nobody says that they don't have it. Everybody says they do. It's just the degree to which they know they have it and accept it and have the courage to use it. And it also, it's difficult is that, again, as I said before, intuition doesn't have its own language. It doesn't come from that part of the brain that can formulate words. It's more of a visceral feeling thing. So everybody has that sense that I don't know how to describe this. I just know I have it. That seems to be a common thing. And a lot of great examples, wonderful examples of people who have been what you might call successful, how you might define that, their books, their businesses, how much money they've made, what kind of family they have, and their relationship with their kids. All of that comes back down to, yes, I made some really important decisions based on intuition. Conversely, I've also heard people say I've made some really bad decisions when I didn't follow it. And I can be one of the first ones that will tell you that. I'm like going, I didn't trust my intuition. I didn't have the courage. I was too vulnerable. I didn't want to let people down. I was going to go against the tide. And my intuition said this way and everyone was going that way. And that's really hard to do, because talk about your first comment around, do you just sort of know what you like? No, I didn't want to disappoint all these people. My little quick story on that is I knew that I shouldn't have gotten married my first marriage. I knew it. I remember walking down this path 5 minutes before getting in line to do my wedding procession. And I went, this doesn't feel right. And I did not have the courage to call off an expensive wedding and had grandparents there and people flew out from all over the country. I mean, man, would I be a turd in the punch bowl to do that? But it was it was absolutely true. And even on the honeymoon night, and from then on after, I realized that was not the right thing to do. So the intuition, I think, has a cousin for it to be fully expressed, which is courage. Because you have to have the courage to trust something that doesn't have language, courage to trust something that might not be accepted by others, and courage maybe to go a direction that others don't feel comfortable going. Courage to stand out, courage to be unique, courage to speak up, courage to have authenticity. I think intuition is fantastic, but it can be very scary when you are faced with your knowing.
I am so thrilled with everything you've shared. You are a gift to me.
Oh,
I look forward to a future conversation, more conversations with you. Dean Newlund, thank you so much for your time.
it's all my pleasure, Phyllis. Thank you.